All right, so great. All right, so on today's webinar, I'll be joined by members of the Connecticut Coalition to Protect Bears, who will each cover sections of this presentation. We have with us today, Deborah Gale, a board member, and Laura Simon, the president of the Connecticut Wildlife Rehabilitators Association. We have Annie Hornish, the Connecticut State Director of the Humane Society of the United States. We have Joanne Bastille, Executive Director for Connecticut Votes for Animals. Sue Massino, spokesperson for Keeps the Woods, and Nicole Rivard, Government Relations Manager for Friends of Animals. The Connecticut Coalition to Protect Bears, our mission statement is, through educational outreach and legislative advocacy, the Connecticut Coalition to Protect Bears promotes effective, non-lethal coexistence between people and Connecticut's native black bears. So this evening, moving right along, we will have already done welcome and introductions. We will be, reviewing the recent black bear killing in Newtown and get an update on the status of her cubs being rehabilitated in New Hampshire. We will learn from wildlife experts on humane management of Connecticut's black bear population. We will hear about the laws, policy, and public education regarding bears in Connecticut. We'll learn about better habitat and forest protection in relation to our bears. And finally, we'll recap how to coexist peacefully with bears and strategies to keep bears away. Then we'll wrap up with some questions and answers. If you have questions as we go along, put them into the chat and we'll get to as many as we can within the hour, okay? Sound good? All right, great. So as many of you know, on Thursday, May 12th, a mother bear was killed in Newtown. The bear, affectionately known as Bobby, was well known within the neighborhood and had a social media page as well. And it was created with photos of her because she had so many frequent sightings. As we'll see in greater detail later, the killing of this mother bear is an irreplaceable loss. Bears are a keystone species, meaning that they influence other forms of life within that ecosystem. Black bears are naturally shy animals, but because of attractants such as garbage, bird feeders, and compost piles, they can be drawn too close to human habitation. Bears should not feel comfortable in yards and neighborhoods. And to keep bears wild and people safe, it is essential to be educated as to effective non-lethal measures people and communities can take towards peaceful coexistence. Just let me go to the next slide. All right, to keep bears away, we have some good tips here. So proper garbage management. Make sure that you keep garbage inaccessible to bears. Put out your garbage the day of pickup. Bring in bird feeders from March to November. Secure your pet food if you feed, and all food really. If you feed your animals outside, make sure you bring in the food immediately after they're done. Keep your dogs on a leash. Bear and dog encounters can sometimes get really tense and lead to unfortunate circumstances. Clean your grill. That delicious smell of food can absolutely attract bears. Secure your chickens, your bees, and your livestock with electric fencing. Secure your compost pile and make sure bears can't get to it readily. Make bears uncomfortable in your yard. We're going to go into a little more detail later about some of these tips, but I thought we would start out with some of these tips just so we can, really hammer them home because they're really important to our bears here in Connecticut. And finally, encourage community education. Share these tips with others. Talk to other people about the bears in your neighborhood and the bears, how to keep bears safe. So by becoming bear aware, people in communities will also help ensure that bear cubs like Bobby's bear cubs, which in many instances are too young to survive on their own, are not left to orphans. And though Bobby was beloved, her celebrity status in Newtown led to tragic consequences. And now to talk about the incident in Newtown are Deborah Gale, board member, and Laura Simon, president of the Connecticut Wildlife Rehabilitators Association. Go ahead, Deborah.
Hi, everyone. I'm going to just quickly give you a narrative on what occurred during the 5 days from when Bobby the bear was shot to death on Thursday at 11 a.m. by an off-duty Ridgefield police sergeant. Her cubs, thankfully, were up a tree in a neighbor's yard nearby and safe for the time being. Animal control and deep staff arrived on the scene a short time later. But what we found most distressing at CWRA and the other organizations involved is not only was it distressing that the mother bear was killed unnecessarily and tragically, but unfortunately, our state agency in charge of wildlife did not accurately assess those cubs, nor seize the opportunity to capture the cubs at that moment when they were accessible. Instead, the mother's carcass was removed immediately, and understandably so that people would not see her in that condition, but unfortunately, this prompted the cubs to wander aimlessly in search of her. Cubs would not normally leave the area where when their mom's body is present. So by taking away her carcass, the first important opportunity to capture the bears was lost. Next slide. As the story was picked up by the media, the agency's messaging was confusing. A public backlash was created when DEEP staff conveyed that they would allow nature to take its course and asserted that the cubs were old enough to live on their own. This created much controversy because standard bear rehabilitation practices are for cubs under 7 months to be taken into a rehab facility. DEEP stated that the Newtown cubs weighed between 20 and 25 pounds. Yet when they were finally captured, they only weighed 11 and 13 pounds, half that size. Actually, they're not bigger than a normal house cat. So, and it's highly unlikely that they could have survived on their own. And although DEEP claims to have had success releasing cubs at this young an age, we haven't seen any supporting data or studies to this effect. We don't know how old the prior cubs were or how much they weighed at the time they lost their mother. And most importantly, how long they survived post-release and what methodology was used to track them. DEEP has made the decision to leave cubs to fend for themselves on several prior occasions. Most recently in Canton, where 3 orphan cubs were released by DEEP at what we fear is yet again too young an age. Bear cubs are not weaned until 7 months of age at the earliest. And actually, not only do bear cubs nurse throughout the summer, but they may not be fully weaned for a full year, according to scientific studies. Cubs need the fat storage they get from mother's milk and to be taught foraging skills to make it through the winter. 4-month-old cubs are completely unprotected from predators, especially adult male bears who commonly kill cubs. For example, Wyoming officials reported last week an incident where a well-known mother grizzly bear, similar to Bobby, lost her 3 cubs, and they're asserting that it was most likely due to predation by a male bear. Next slide. DEEP reported multiple times to the media that they were monitoring the cubs. The cubs were last seen the evening of the shooting at sundown. DEEP personnel were not seen in the area by neighbors or rescuers who spent days looking for the cubs. The first time DEEP had an active presence in the woods was after CWRA and HSUS located the bear cubs. DEEP's absence was so notable that the Newtown selectmen contacted the agency to find out where they were. On Saturday, next slide, CWRA members attempted to locate the cubs, combing a large wooded area. On Sunday, we set out again, this time with a team of staff of volunteers from the HSUS, Sierra Club, a professional tracker through Connecticut Boats for Animals, other wildlife advocates, and a professional from a place called Hope who brought heat sensor camera equipment. The group adhered to strict protocols so the cubs would not get spooked. Finally, after much searching, we located the cubs 80 feet up in a tree. As per protocol, CWRA informed DEEP right away that the cubs were found. We requested that DEEP send staff to capture them. The CWRA had purchased large traps and food, and we had bear formula as well to attract the cubs and assist DEEP with the rescue. Next slide. 5 hours later, and close to dark, DEEP officers responded to our request for help by sending in several DEEP enforcement officers and town policemen. Yet it turned out that the officers were there to remove us from the woods, not to help rescue the cubs. They reiterated that DEEP decided the cubs were old enough to be on their own, so they were not going to proceed with a rescue. The cubs came down from the tree, and despite our having traps, food, and the ability to help DEEP capture them, the agency again told us they weren't going to do anything. This was a lost opportunity number 2 to capture the cubs. Representatives David Michelle, Rajiv Ali Brennan, Nicole Clarice Dietra, and Ann Hughes actually drove to Newtown that night and to speak with the DEEP officials in the woods. And they also spoke to the press that was gathering in a nearby parking lot. Calls were made to the governor and the commissioner of DEEP by the legislators. Next slide. The DEEP commissioner then made the positive decision to allow for the rescue of the cubs. The reason for the change in position for DEEP was because of all the attention the bears were receiving from the public and concerns that the cubs would be harmed by this attention. Disappointingly, there was no acknowledgement that the rescue is necessary for the simple reason that the cubs were too young to be on their own. Instead, public interference was blamed. Next slide. When we arrived Monday morning, a DEEP vehicle was already on site. The bear biologist and a technician were in the truck. Soon after, several legislators and HSUS arrived, as well as the media. Another search for the cubs began. They had moved from the night before. Finally, when the cubs were located, DEEP personnel went into the woods to capture the cubs. The cubs were brought out 4 very long hours later, heavily sedated. Thankfully, next slide, both cubs were finally rescued and taken to the Killam Bear Center by DEEP staff 1 day later. And I spoke with Ben a couple days ago, and he said that the cubs are doing very well. They're acclimating after their trauma. They're making friends with the other cubs, and they really fit in well with the group. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Laura Simon, who's also with the Connecticut Wildlife Rehabilitators Association.
Great. Thank you, Deb. There are several important takeaways that are underscored by this tragic situation. We're in full agreement with our state agency, DEEP, on the dire need to teach the public how to coexist with bears and to stop putting out food enticements, which create the conflicts and these kinds of tragic outcomes. And you'll be hearing more about these specific steps people can take later in this webinar. Next slide, please. It's essential for DEEP to have a clear, consistent protocol for handling orphan bear cubs so they are not released to die. Bear cubs spend a long period, well over a year, learning survival skills from their mother and being protected by her. And even if they are learning to forage on their own, it does not mean they are self-sufficient. What's needed is a clear set of collaboratively developed guidelines, which outline at what age and what weight cubs can be released and specific criteria for sending them to a rehabilitator. This would alleviate concerns that DEEP does not have a consistent protocol for handling orphan bear situations, and that they seem to have made questionable assumptions about bear cub size and their ability to survive on their own. The bottom line is that we want to see the agency's decision-making become more consistent with the science on black bear natural history and behaviors, and with protocols adopted by other states, which allow bear rehabilitation and have a lot more experience with it. Thirdly, we also want to see an in-state facility authorized to handle bear cubs again. We don't want to be dependent on out-of-state facilities when there are these orphan cases that can't be prevented. Next slide, please. It's very difficult to raise cubs in a way that they stay wild and learn survival skills the way the mother would teach them. Wildlife rehabilitators who specialize in bears use specific methods which foster wild behaviors and closely emulate what the cubs would experience in nature. Yet, even the best rehabilitator cannot duplicate what a mother bear would do, and it's no substitute really for a mother's bear's role. And that's why we want to make sure we prevent as many of these unnecessary orphanings as possible. This Newtown incident and other similar cases underscore why we really need to redouble our efforts to teach people how to coexist with bears and prevent them from impulsively killing them or habituating them to people, all of which invariably ends in tragedy. So hopefully this webinar will help you see how you can help in this effort. Next, I'd like to introduce Annie Hornish, the Connecticut State Director for the Humane Society of the US.
Thank you, Laura. The Connecticut public desires humane management of bears. With Bobby's cubs, there were over 110 media stories in print, all in favor of rehabilitating the bear cubs. This sentiment of kindness towards wildlife aligns with the 2018 study, sponsored in part by the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies, which found that public desire for peaceful coexistence with wildlife is growing all across America, including right here in Connecticut. The largest group in the nation now are mutualists, who were defined as those who see animals as family or companions, deserving of caring and rights like humans, and who respond positively to a vision of humans and wildlife living side by side. The report showed a value shift in recreation that indicates that interest in hunting and fishing is declining, while interest in wildlife viewing is increasing. Here in Connecticut, only 1% of the population hunts. Wildlife watchers, hikers, mountain bikers, dog walkers, and horseback riders greatly outnumber hunters in Connecticut. The good news is that not only do people want humane resolutions to conflicts with wildlife when they occur, next slide, please. The science backs the use of humane, non-lethal resolutions as the most effective strategy. Next slide, please. Recreational hunting is the biggest source of mortality for black bears nationwide. Here in Connecticut, we fortunately do not allow bear hunting of our state's small bear population. In the latest population study done in 2014 by Yukon researchers, there were only 235 adult bears in the northwest corner, where hunting legislation has been proposed. The study projected approximately 400 adult bears statewide, and the population of bears has not been studied since then. Unfortunately, the media tends to use headlines that stoke fear of black bears, using terms like increasing sightings and incidents involving black bears in misleading fashions. Yes, there are thousands of reported sightings, but if a bear is ambling through a neighborhood, that single bear is likely going to be reported multiple times. Further, the Yukon study highlighted that every sighting is not a unique bear, rather multiple sightings of the same bear. Regarding bear incidents, it's important to know that the overwhelming majority of reported incidents involve the minor inconveniences of bears getting into trash and toppling bird feeders, which could be avoided if humans simply modified their behavior. Vehicle collisions have been a significant source of black bear mortality in Connecticut. From the most recent data, car hits alone would have offset any annual population gains. So please slow down while driving. And finally, there have been recent efforts to institute bear hunting in Connecticut. The American Wildlife Values Study pointed out that the values of our state agency, the Connecticut Department of Energy and Environmental Protection, or DEEP, are misaligned with the values of the Connecticut people. DEEP promotes a bear hunt, but people want to coexist peacefully. And if conflicts occur, people want humane resolutions. We must educate our communities about bears and their value to the ecosystem we share. Find humane solutions when conflicts arise, and most importantly, conflict prevention strategies. But we also need to make changes in how DEEP manages bears. DEEP has a long history of knee-jerk killing, sometimes even when they are not sure they have the right bear, or when bears are not behaving aggressively in the first place, like what happened a few years ago with joggers in Granby and Simsbury. DEEP should be looking at the science, and when they collect data, it should be done properly. DEEP needs to have a better, kinder plan in place for orphan cubs, including partnering with entities like Wildlife in Crisis in Weston, Connecticut, who are equipped to take in bear cubs. We need better policies and better laws. Here to discuss the need for stronger laws is Joanne Basile, Executive Director of Connecticut Votes for Animals.
Thank you, Annie. Well, we've heard lots of helpful information so far today, and using that information as a backdrop, let's talk about next steps. What happened to Bobby and perhaps what also happened to the bear in Canton are just two recent examples that drive home the need for sound, long-term policies statewide that keep humans and bears safe. The law in Connecticut is clear. It's illegal to take bears, meaning killing bears. There is no hunting season on bears in Connecticut, in essence, making bears a protected species. Violation of this section is subject to a $500 fine, 30 days in jail, jail time, or both. DEEP has the authority to kill bear if they pose a public health and safety threat. Beyond those provisions, there are many interpretations over the rules concerning killing bears, which is something we heard this past spring when Deep Commissioner Katie Dykes testified on the proposed nuisance wildlife bill. The fact that Deep has not yet ruled on the Newtown shooting of Bobby, in my humble opinion, is disturbing. In a well-publicized case in Thomaston just 2 years ago, Deep was very quick to act. Deep charged a man who shot a bear in his yard, presumably because he was threatening his dog. In that case, the man was charged, went to court, and fined $350 under Connecticut statute. While this minimal fine hardly provides a disincentive to shooting bear, in this instance, Deep did its job quickly and carried out the law as it was intended. So in anticipation of the upcoming legislative session, we know that there will be continued efforts to call for a bear hunt in Connecticut. While loud, we need to remember cries for a hunt will come from a very small representation of the state's population. From everything that we've seen and has been reported in the press, the Connecticut public does not want a bear hunt. People move to Connecticut because they appreciate and want to be surrounded by nature. But of course, we all need to be sure that there is a safe environment for all. We have already heard about several legislative initiatives, such as a prohibition on the intentional feeding of wildlife, proposals requiring effective non-lethal methods to be sure that they're used as the first line of defense, and possible subsidies for non-lethal protection for farm crops. Whichever proposal ultimately moves forward, we know it must contain a strong education component. Changing human behavior is hard, but it's essential if we are to succeed in living harmoniously with nature. Taking a page from experts in real bear country, the coalition will be advocating for comprehensive education programs at the state and local level. The coalition is available to do presentations and is committed to getting the state to do the same. But to be successful, we need you to reach out to your state legislator and make clear that what is needed is a comprehensive program that promotes non-lethal answers to living with Connecticut's wildlife. We need and are depending on you to be our partner in this effort. The coalition will work hard, but remember, it's when a legislator hears from you, their constituent, that is what will move the legislative needle. For us to be successful, we need you to speak up for Connecticut's bears. And now I'm going to turn over the presentation to Susan Messino from Keep the Woods.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Joanne, and thank you to the Coalition to Protect Bears for including me. The mission of Keep the Woods is science and advocacy for natural forest ecosystems and clean water. And so that's my role here tonight as part of Keep the Woods. And I'd like to add a little bit of a broader perspective, temporal and spatial perspective about our landscape and the role of bears on that landscape. And I wanted to mention that I'm also a professor at Trinity College. I have a PhD in biology. I'm a member of the Open Space Commission in Simsbury, which you may know that Simsbury is a very active area in terms of bear sightings. And I'm also the vice president of the Simsbury Grange, which has taken an active role in public education about keeping bears wild and people safe. So I was part of a working group a couple of years ago, assembled by Senator Kevin Witkos and Representative Mike Demikas, which included a forest ecologist, a very experienced animal control officer, myself, League of Conservation Voters, to look at this issue with bears and other nuisance wildlife like coyote in Connecticut. And we looked at the science and at the deep experience of experts to try and understand how we could prevent problems in our communities and handle this in the best way. And the take-home message of my few minutes tonight is that the problem is really with people's behavior. So I'd like to share a little landscape perspective and share a little bit of information about our behavior. So on the next slide, we know that Connecticut's black bears are part of our ecosystems. And sometimes I hear people say that, well, there weren't any bears a while ago. And I want to share with you first the changes in the dynamics of New England forests over the last 400 years. So if you look at the left part of the slide, all of the states in New England, which are each a distinct line on this graph, they were all about 90% forested during pre-European times. And what happened is our landscape was progressively deforested, and the recovery of New England's forests since that wide-scale deforestation is probably the most successful instance of reforestation in human history. So we've been very lucky that our forests have recovered, and bears have been part of that recovery. And as Anne mentioned in the beginning, bears are a keystone species, meaning that they influence other forms of life and regulate the entire ecosystem. Their numbers are not regulated by predators. They're regulated by habitat, by social interactions, etc. So their numbers have changed along with their habitat. On the next slide, what you can see is that the forests in New England have not only recovered, but they've also somewhat stabilized. Even in one of the most densely populated states, Connecticut is still about 60% forested. And on the next point for this slide, you can see that New England is even more than 60% forested. And interestingly, forest cover has somewhat stabilized in the last maybe 2 decades or so. It's sort of stabilized. We're not massively deforesting anymore, which is great. And it's something we can't take for granted. But the metric of forest cover is not a measure of forest quality. And forest quality is still at risk. And that's what we need for our natural ecosystems. The next point that I'd like to make related to this is that our core forests have been declining. And we need these core forests as intact ecosystems where all species are protected. And we need to have connections between these core forest areas. And right now in Connecticut, we have no designated real protected areas, which is a public policy gap that's receiving very little attention so far. On the next slide, I'd like to just share that related to these massive changes in the forest cover and quality of our landscape, there have been changes in all kinds of species, particularly, for example, grassland bird species, which were initially not present in New England, increased a lot when we were deforested, and are now declining again as our forests have grown back. So we need to kind of settle those at a level that we're happy with maintaining those grassland areas. On the next slide, you can see the opposite effect has happened with bears, where these are my numbers from Massachusetts. There used to be several thousand bears in Massachusetts. They were virtually extirpated, so eliminated when our forests were eliminated, and now they've been coming back. So, and if we look at New England altogether on the next slide, you can see this dynamic among a number of species. The changes in forest are in the green line, and a number of other species, including keystone species like beaver, are also coming back, which are extremely beneficial to the landscape. So we need to really think about maintaining the ecological integrity of our landscape, which supports keystone species and all of the other native species in this region that we all love and appreciate. On the next slide, it's time to answer the age-old question, does a bear live in the woods? And the answer is yes. And it's their habitat. And they provide many ecosystem services like seed dispersal for plants and trees, and kind of regulating the whole habitat. And they need these high quality forests to raise and train their young to forage, to make dens, etc., so that we are not perpetuating a cycle of bears that are coming into our neighborhoods and looking for trash and easy meals. So the key to keeping bears wild and people safe is to make sure that bears are comfortable going about their business in their habitat and making sure that they have high quality areas to forage. And there are plenty of natural food sources. And I propose kind of a carrot and a stick approach. So to keep bears wild and safe, I carry a little bell or a tiny noisemaker when I'm hiking, or I whistle or I talk. And if a bear hears you, they're shy. They won't intend to run into you. So the carrot approach is keeping the habitat and keeping them comfortable in their habitat. The stick is making our neighborhoods unpleasant food deserts. That means no food and unpleasant people. And this could mean making a lot of noise. It could be motion sensitive lights, anything that's shocking to the nervous system. And that will teach them that that's an aversive experience. And at the Simsbury Grange, we've been giving out these wildlife deterrent noisemakers with a label on it. I don't have a label on this one, but prepare yourself. I'm going to shake it and it's unpleasant. And when you try to deter a bear, you keep on deterring it until it leaves. So you don't just blow something once and then say, oh, it didn't leave. You need to consistently get that bear to move on and know that that's not a pleasant place for it. So just my last point is that we need to have no reward in our neighborhoods, make it unpleasant, and know that it's our responsibility to make bears unwelcome in our neighborhoods. And that was the completely core conclusion of the Nuisance Wildlife Group that I participated in after talking to experts and after looking at all the science. And now I'd like to turn it over to Nicole to kind of give you a summary of all the information we've talked about so far.
Thank you, Susan. Hi, everyone. First, I just want to say thank you all for being here. We started this coalition to combat misinformation about black bears in Connecticut. So it really gives us hope that you're all here and signed up to listen to us. We understand you want to have a better understanding of Connecticut's black bears, and together we can prevent tragedies like those in Newtown, Canton, and Thomaston. Together we can keep bears wild and people safe. We as a coalition believe essential and lasting solutions can come from residents like all of you. If you apply yourself and also work with others in your neighborhoods and larger communities to prevent human-bear interactions, you're going to affect change for people and bears. And we hope that's as empowering for you as it is for us. When I spoke to Ben Killam, who, as Deb mentioned earlier, is rehabilitating Bobby's cubs, he said he has an expression, and that's, there are no nuisance black bears, only nuisance humans. I'm going to say that again. There are no nuisance black bears, only nuisance humans. And all joking aside, interactions with black bears are almost entirely the result of human actions. And that's, you know, one thing we hope you take away from our presentation tonight. And despite advice to the contrary, people still leave food attractants out, or they fail to secure chicken coops. Ben's largest source of orphan cubs is unprotected chicken coops, where female bears in search of high quality foods to produce milk for their cubs meet their demise facing a homeowner with a gun. It's particularly frustrating for Killam and for all of us at the coalition, since chickens can easily be protected with electric fences. Also, since there's been an uptick in people raising backyard chickens here in Connecticut during the pandemic, Connecticut's bears are in more danger than ever. So we need your help. If you see something, say something. Make sure your neighbors are using an electric fence around their chicken coop. Experts recommend the following specs for deterring bears. And if you forget these, you can always email me. It's 0.7 joules, a minimum of 6,000 volts, a height of 4 feet or more, and 5 or more wires, and maintenance is key. Not putting trash out until collection time, bringing bird feeders in from March through November, and as someone said earlier, not feeding pets outdoors, it's also going to help bears, keep bears out of trouble. It's also, like Susan said, crucial to make bears feel uncomfortable in your yard with aversive conditioning. Making loud noises, hand clapping, and yelling will teach bears to associate humans with danger and leave your yard and avoid it in the future. Using a bear-resistant container, I have one here, I don't know how well you can see it, is almost a surefire way to defeat determined bears too, according to experts. They range in size and typically start at about $100. And we feel that's a small investment compared to the price of replacing containers and cleaning up after a bear week after week. Not to mention it's an even smaller investment compared to a bear's life. Before his retirement last year, Warren, Connecticut first selectman encouraged his residents to use bear resistant trash containers, and that also gives us hope. He told us that USA Waste and Recycling offers 95-gallon cans that can be rented for $10 a month. And he also mentioned when they were going to renegotiate the contract, the more people in the communities who are willing to use these containers, the price could actually potentially go down. And I just wanted to let people know that there's actually Barracuda Bins, which is located right in Litchfield. They are now offering fully automated cans that can be used by fully automated haulers. So other signs of change in Connecticut, which is good news for people and bears, a statewide wildlife feeding ban, as we mentioned earlier, has not yet passed, but the towns of Simsbury and Granbury have adopted their own. So what that means is these ordinances prohibit bird feeders from April through November 30th, unless the source of food is Niger thistle seeds that many birds like, but bears don't have a taste for. People also have a responsibility to keep bears and themselves safe outside of their yard and when they venture into bears' homes. So when they're hiking, like Susan said, bears are shy and want to avoid conflict. So if you see a bear while hiking, please give him or her space, either turn around and go back or detour around them. If the bear is directly in your sighting and is communicating with you by snorting, swatting, or false charging, make yourself tall and large. Don't run. And if the bear does try to attack, spray bear spray just above its head so the liquid falls in its eyes. So to wrap up, we want to reiterate that irresponsible human behavior is deadly for black bears in Connecticut. So 3 nuisance bears, so-called nuisance bears, were killed in Connecticut in 2020 for entering homes, along with 4 others for problematic behavior. We're looking forward to a time when none of Connecticut's bears are killed for their intelligence or their resourcefulness, as they just try to eke out a space to live in a state where more than 3,600,000 human animals live. That time is going to come if all of you keep the pressure on your neighbors to take proactive steps like the ones we advocate for, but also if you call on local and state legislators to pass legislation to get residents to comply with some of these strategies as well. If you'd like our How to Bear It in Black Bear season brochure, or if you would like help from any of us talking to your legislators, please don't hesitate to email any of us, and our emails are listed here. So I just want to say thank you again on behalf of the Connecticut Coalition to Protect Black Bears.
Thank you, Nicole. Thank you, everybody. That was so amazing. All right, I'm going to stop sharing the screen and maybe we can get to some questions if anyone's got questions here. I have a couple links I'm going to put into the chat as well while we're having questions and answers, because a link to find your legislators if you don't know who your legislator is and you'd like to contact them and encourage non-lethal bear. Yes, go ahead, Annie.
And I'd just like to mention we have the Honorable State Representative David Michel in this group. I see he's in the chat room, and he was instrumental in helping the Newtown Bears, led the charge, and he's a tremendous animal advocate, chair of the Animal Advocacy Caucus in the Connecticut legislature.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for recognizing him. He is a stalwart advocate. All right, so questions and answers. So if you have I also have a Sierra Club's updated flyer about black bears information and tips on how to keep black bears safe here. All right, so there was one question in the chat that we'll get to. I'm going to read out loud if that's okay, Elizabeth. It says, Glastonbury has a number of bears. I've encountered them. Meanwhile, Always manages most of the residential and public park trash. How can we work with Allstate to educate their clients on how to store trash to prevent wildlife from being attracted to garbage? And if you'd like to ask a question out loud, please just put the word stack in the chat and we'll get to you in the order it's put in. Go ahead. Does anybody have an answer for Elizabeth? How to work with waste haulers?
Yeah, hi, Elizabeth, hi.
Hi, I don't know if you can hear, can you hear me, Joanne?
I can.
I have no idea to put myself on video, but it just feels to me here in Glastonbury, and I don't know about other towns, but we have, one vendor for all of our trash. I personally don't, I go to the recycling center myself, but all of my neighbors work with All Waste. And it feels to me that there should be an opportunity to work with management and All Waste in towns like Glastonbury, where we have bears, to ask them to communicate with their clients on how they can prevent bears and other wildlife, raccoons, et cetera, of getting into their trash. Because I see the trash, if you go to a public park in Glastonbury, the trash cans are over full, and it's All Waste that manages it. So give me some advice. Thanks.
Thank you, Elizabeth. I mean, it's a great point. And we've been discussing how the coalition could begin to work with some of the haulers to see if they can make different arrangements. I believe it was Nicole who mentioned something that was happening in one of the towns that when she was talking to one of the first selectmen. The first selectman in that particular town became very active, and they were going to negotiate. They have a single hauler in that particular town, and they were going to negotiate with them about making these trash, these garbage cans, bear-proof garbage cans, more readily available at a price that people could afford. And I think we have found just in our coalition, in talking to various communities, that there are actually haulers that already have these trash cans available. The problem has been that that information is not getting out to their customers. And I think this is one of the actions that perhaps, we were talking about this earlier today, that the coalition could take, which would be really to reach out to these trash haulers and get them to be more proactive in making what we presume they already have available to them, making it known to their population, to their customers.
Thanks, Joanne. I also saw that David just said, reach out to the municipal leaders and the mayor. And you know what, Michael, David, I'm going to contact right when this ends, Jason Doucette, who you know, and who is my legislator representative. And I am going to propose that to him, that he and I work together to contact the Glastonbury municipal leaders about this. So great suggestions. Thank you so much, everyone. I appreciate it.
Can I add something, Elizabeth? This is Nicole from Friends of Animals. It sounds like you're talking about the trash containers in like parks and at trailheads and things like that. And I talked to, this is a homeowners association. This was, it's a 4,500 wooded acre facility in the foothills of Pennsylvania's Pocono Mountains. And they actually passed an ordinance, the homeowners association did, that they have to use bear resistant trash containers at all facilities and trailheads where people congregate and potentially have trash. So if you want to reach out to me, I can give you the language of the ordinance that they passed that might be, that I know it's a homeowners association, but it could be used in a community, because it sounds like the issue that you're talking about is not people's garbage in their own yards. It's at these public places. And it sounds like they're not using bear resistant trash cans, and that's a huge problem.
Thank you. I would appreciate it.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it's important. People can have a great impact at the local level. Very few people reach out to their mayor or first selectman. And so when you do reach out to them, you are heard. If you attend town meetings, local town meetings, you'll see generally it's a very small public turnout. And so there's a lot of power in that.
That's so true. So true. We have another question in the chat from Scott. Will DEEP certify a state animal rehab organization to raise orphan cubs? Seems the need is there. Why do CT cubs have to go out of state to live?
Great question. We are very hopeful we can work with DEEP to reauthorize a rehab facility again to be able to take in bear cubs, because we very much would like to see that. And it's important. So stay tuned.
I just want to add one point to that. I think in addition to having a facility certified, it would be good if there were professionals that were authorized to trap bears when we know that cubs are too young and are orphaned and need to be rehabilitated. So then there wouldn't be such delay and confusion in terms of having the right outcome if we had, more regional opportunities for professionals to take care of the situation.
All right. Thank you. Excellent points. Andy has a question. Is there anything that can be done now to help the surviving orphan bears from Canton, or is it too late? I think the Killen location would take them if DEEP would save them.
Well, I think information is being gathered right now, again, by Representative Michelle. And once we get some more of that information, we're happy to encourage DEEP and see what can be done at that point. But we're still in the process of getting all that information, the details.
I don't think we're clear on how old the cubs are, where they've been relocated to, and how they're doing. And we need to know all that information in order to make a better decision for them.
If I may, DEEP is taking a long time to answer back to those emails. Just putting it out there. Don't hesitate to write to DEEP as well.
Good point.
And if you write to DEEP, a good thing would be to copy your state legislators, both the rep and the senator. Anytime the more you add people that are official or elected officials, it causes a mess on their side because somebody's going to have to answer. So don't hesitate to put a whole bunch of people. I used to do that before getting elected. Look where it got me. But it tends to work on occasions, most of the time, actually.
I think it's easier in other states. Other states that allow for bear rehabilitation have clear guidelines, such as bears born before July need to go automatically into wildlife rehabilitation because they're known to be too young. So that makes it simpler when the guidance is clear. And we need that kind of clear guidance here.
We have to work on legislating if they don't want to adapt their policies to being more humane or more respectful of wildlife, then we absolutely have to fight them on the legislature side. The problem is the chairs have to maintain a relationship with the agency commissioners, and that is in the middle of that process. So if your own legislator is, for example, in leadership, it's very helpful.
True. Very true. A question from Elise, and that Irene answered some of it too, so that was good. But if anyone wants to answer, Elise says, I heard that the trash company in my town, USA Hauling, has a wait list for people to get the bear-proof bins. Is there a way to work with these companies so that they are able to get the trash bins more easily? And Irene put a link to some of the trash. You can get it retail. Thank you, Irene. Does anybody want to answer, take a stab at that one?
Hi, this is Irene. Yeah, it's just like a strap that you put over it, but I live in New Milford, so it's kind of bear country. And the garbage guy, he's a local guy. He said it's quite effective.
I can add, there's something called the International Grizzly Bear Committee, and they have the most current listing of approved bear resistant trash products, and their web address is igbconline.com. Also, I mentioned earlier barracuda.com. And then experts also highly recommend the Kodiak products, Kodiak, just for some, other examples. If people, just want to purchase one on their own and not through, not rent one through their trash hauler.
Sorry, I'm en route, so I can't really type, but this is my webinar while I'm driving, which I was glad to not be at home to be able to take notes. So do you know if the local companies will use the other companies' trash bins? Like, are they a little like hefty about that? I don't know, because I haven't had to look into it because we keep ours in the garage, but I have a lot of people. I'm in Harwinton, so there's all over our Facebook site. Everybody's like, bear. I'm like, yeah, we live in the woods. There's bears. Okay.
I can't speak. I don't have a definitive answer, but I did speak with the Barracuda in Litchfield, and they said their most popular trash can right now, it's called the Stealth 2, because it's new and it's fully automated. So, in the past where haulers might not have wanted to use one that's not fully automated, this one is. So I suspect that's why it's why it's so popular right now, because it's fully automated.
Okay, cool. I'll spread the word in our town, just because I know that a lot of people said that they were on some wait list or whatnot to be able to get them, but if they can get them in other ways, right, then we'll let them do that.
Yeah, and feel free to email us if you need a recap of the websites I mentioned.
And now is a good time to ask your town council for subsidies too, and because a lot of the local communities are awash with money right now from federal dollars for COVID relief and ARPA funds and all that. So there's money being freed up. So it's worth asking.
Mm-hmm.
All right, cool. Thank you.
And we shouldn't forget also that this is an election year. So some of your state elected officials, governor's office, therefore the agencies may be a little more responsive than they've been in the past if you've had problems getting your getting any of those people to pay attention to you.
That is very true.
Lisa, do you have a question?
I do. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. My question is more for Bear 211, who was considered a nuisance bear, but was fed when he was very young. No matter what they did, he just kept coming around using slip and slides and hammocks, and just broke my heart. It was like a pet died when he passed on. What would be a solution for that in Connecticut? Because he's not just he was very humanized. Do you know what I mean? Where would he go besides putting him down or getting hit by a car or whatever? You know what I mean? What would we have for a bear like that was very young, fed, and just, he appreciated humans?
Well, I'll answer. This points back to the preventing habituation of bears. It's really is vital, because when a bear starts getting too comfortable, over time, and aversive conditioning might not work. I mean, what's something that could be done with that bear could have been shooting, having, you know, trained professionals do things like shooting beanbag bullets at him and trying to decondition him from feeling comfortable around humans. It would take, you know, a lot of work, some manpower to do that, but that would be a potential humane response. But the key is really focusing on not getting to that point in the first place.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. No, I get that part. I know that there was one thing where a man had said he was hazing him, and they were both looking at each other confused, which again broke my heart. Like, I don't know if he would have ever been conditioned to not care for us. I think he really did appreciate humans.
Yeah.
I mean, in that case, there's nothing that can be done for them if it got that bad. I mean, from what I understood, I guess he was being fed by some homeless people in Waterbury, and that went on for a while. And I think that would be very hard to reverse that at that point. I mean, is a zoo an option? I know we don't want to have them in captivity, but you know, death is the only other alternative, really.
Yeah. And I think what you're describing too is really a rare situation.
Right.
A lot of the habituated bears are killed after one or two problematic behaviors. So this is like a kind of a one-off. It's a rare thing. And it, you know, it's hard to base policy on very rare occurrences like that.
I understand.
I would say just focus hard on prevention. And yeah, the only thing I would suggest is, you know, getting, you know, there's things like Karelian bear dogs, dogs that are trained to keep bears out of areas.
Right.
That's things like that could theoretically be applied as well.
Okay. All right. Thank you for answering that.
Thank you.
You're
Yeah,
welcome.
I just want to follow up on that because we did get into those kind of solutions in the nuisance wildlife group that I mentioned before, and particularly Officer Mark Rudowitz, who's extremely experienced in Simsbury. And he talked about kind of an escalating scale of tools, which would include this kind of more severe hazing with beanbags or loud, you know, like, you know, gun, not a shooting gun, but like a loud gun kind of thing.
Noisy
having those, having those available to animal control officers under conditions where the bear would not be moving along with normal aversive conditioning. And there was a lot of interest in getting a Karelian bear dog. And those kind of strategies have been extremely effective in areas where they've employed these bear dogs. It has reduced problems by 86%. And I also want to mention that that there are areas with far higher bear populations than we have here in Connecticut that have far fewer issues because there's more of a culture of understanding bear behavior and preventing problem bears. So with the solutions are there. We just don't have the public education and awareness widespread enough to have it disseminated to have the solution be broadly effective.
Okay, so we have to go. We have a hard stop at 7 o'clock. So I'm sorry to interrupt. We had one more question in the chat that's kind of related. They're both related to each other. And it was, why is Deep taking so long to complete the investigation into Bobby's killing? Have they given a timeline making it public? Does anybody have an update on the investigation? Can you do it in 1 minute?
No, we feel the same way as you. We keep pressing for answers, and they just keep saying that, you know, the investigation is still ongoing. You know, we're pressing for charges. So we're as frustrated as everyone on this.
And it's very unusual that it should be taking this long. As I said earlier, that the instance that happened in Thomaston, it was resolved within, you know, the guy was charged within 2 or 3 days. Yeah. And this is very peculiar that they have taken as long as they are. And I think it's because of the high profile nature of this case.
I bet you're right.
It sounds like we're all keeping the pressure because we keep asking.
All
a
right,
good
so it's
thing.
7 o'clock. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I do have to go. Sierra Club has another meeting at 7 that needs to start. But I'm going to send out an email tomorrow to everybody who registered, and I'm going to include a link to the presentation. I'm going to include our bear flyer. I'll include Find Your Legislature. I'll include anything that Nicole talked about. If anybody wants that information, I can have her send that to me. So you'll all be getting more information on this. Thank you so much. We appreciate you all for coming to here and learning about how to keep bears safe, how to keep how to, and learning about habitat and everything today. I mean, I've learned so much. So thank you so much. And you'll be hearing from us shortly. Have a great
Bonsoir.
day.
And
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
thank
Thank
you.
you.